the Guyana government can be expected to earn annual revenues that are a multiple, that will be a multiple of our current GDP, even if the price of oil stays around $50 per barrel. I make this point just to emphasize or underscore, Mr. Speaker, that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs has been charged with accelerating the process of integrating elements of the emerging petroleum and gas sector into the overall architecture of foreign policy. One such element is collaboration with other petroleum-producing nations, multilateral entities, and others to share their experience and to have the benefit of the analysis of the petroleum market and the production processes with which they are familiar. A most urgent need for the country, even in its established industrial and agricultural industries, is the shortage of physical and socioeconomic infrastructure. And the provision of infrastructure is an area in which Guyana has struggled to secure meaningful funding over the last 4 decades, except in perhaps what I might describe as fitful financing. The development of the petroleum and especially the gas sector will not materialize unless we are able to arrange such funding in a manner and with a timing consistent with the government-approved plans of the operators. The government of Guyana is currently considering this issue, which also has implications for industry diversification and our ability to secure and maintain control over the new commanding heights of the emerging economy. And it will not be achieved if the ill-informed and politically jaundiced views being peddled by what distinguished Professor Clive Thomas calls the Guyanese media's wholesaler and retailers' anxiety, the peddling of wholesale and retail anxiety amongst the public. Most of our traditional bilateral partners have shown little interest in rendering assistance in this context, and by that I mean in terms of the infrastructure funding. And so we have to turn to non-traditional partners as well as supportive bilaterals and other agencies, private sectors, and NGOs to secure funding for the development of that aspect of infrastructure. And to this end, the Ministry has been consulting with a variety of agencies ranging from the Global LPG Partnership, the Energy Transportation Group, ETG, which are entities focusing and providing assistance to developing countries, for example, to plan, finance, and implement national scale availability and use of liquefied petroleum, that's an example, as well as providing assistance on energy logistics and infrastructure project developments. We are also working with GCOR of Japan, which is funding pre-feasibility studies and oil and gas master plan in relation to the development of downstream activities in Guyana. And in that regard, I make mention of the MOUs, which are constantly confused in the press with IOUs, I believe. MOUs are a tool which can facilitate collaboration, including joint ventures and the promotion of joint ventures and those devices identified by the Minister of Finance, such as PPPs, for downstream activities which the industry may find appropriate and feasible, as well as profitable. And we are pursuing this prior to and alongside the engagement of the relevant agencies with the external partners. So the Ministry of Foreign Affairs will be looking at opportunities and avenues offered by existing international and regional agencies to see what they can offer. And we are particularly interested in seeing how these entities might help with identifying the pillars that are necessary to support such a large and complicated sector. And perhaps I can just pause a second to make mention of a feature which has characterized the debate in Guyana, in which some observers have sought to make arrangements for the prevention or the handling of oil spills, for example, as a condition for their support for exploration and production. And I would say, Mr. Speaker, that whilst the risk of oil spills are real, no single developing state has ever been called upon to meet the cost of a petroleum spill in its entirety. And in fact, states insulate themselves from the risk by the time-worn device of insurance, industry insurance, as well as national disaster arrangements. And I make mention of the 1992 International Oil Pollution Compensation Fund and also the Supplementary Fund. And I want to say that Guyana will be no exception in this regard. And in that context, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs has already presented to Cabinet recommendations, which Cabinet has accepted, regarding the international agreements and conventions to which we need to be signatories in order to benefit from such protection. And we've had also discussions with the Trinidad and Tobago government with a view to seeing where we can collaborate. We can get an insight into how they're handling their risks and how, where the risk between the two countries may overlap, how the two of us can tackle this possible eventuality. But what I wanted to say is that we will also, when the time comes, advise Cabinet to have the relevant agencies on the internal front have put in place the appropriate regulations, meaning that MARAD, EPA, GGMC, and the others may wish to consider requiring tankers operating in Guyana's waters to contribute to funds and to have contracts with CDC, for example, and SEDEMA to ensure that the disaster relief arrangements are properly in place on the internal side as well, not only in relation to the international front. And I want to say that obviously our work in this regard will not simply be a question of joining the relevant, what you might call, petro-diplomacy organization, which is what I've been talking about, or examining our standing in international bodies, but also determining what new internal institutions we might find it necessary to create in order to advance our own foreign policy. So in closing my comments on that aspect, or that chapter as it were, I want to say that contrary to what seems to be the perception in some of the press, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is charged both with having an interface with the international, multinational corporations, international organizational, multinational organizations, and the like, to ensure that they understand our position, they're aware of our laws and regulations, and by the same token, we will comment upon positions taken internally, whether it is by the media or any element of the media, to ensure that they don't misrepresent or project to the international community an image of Guyana which is incorrect, let alone one which is irresponsible. I wouldn't say more on that. I want also to say that post-independent governments of Guyana, say for one relatively recent period, relatively short period, have taken a nationalist position on the operation of multinational corporations in Guyana. We have learned, I think, of the limitations of some of the tools we've used in the past, whether they be nationalizations or very, very tight regulations. What I think, from where I sit, we try to convey to the international, multinational corporations rather, is that they have a responsibility to live within Guyana's laws, to adhere to those laws. we will try to ensure that regulations that are in place have a light touch and are relevant enough to ensure that their performance is mutually beneficial and that they operate with an eye on the sensitivities and the legal requirements in the country. And I'm thinking here of the current debate that is taking place in relation to honoring or respecting labor laws and industrial relations practices. I don't want to say more on that, except to say that, of course, we would expect all operators to recognize that we do have also a history of working with multinational corporations, and in the past have similarly required them to adhere to our laws and regulations. Mr. Speaker, if I may turn briefly to the question of the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Guyana, which is the usual fare of such presentations in this House. Of course, everyone is painfully aware that we continue to face challenges along our borders, both to the east and west. And in 2018, following heightened diplomatic efforts, we were able to secure a decision which predecessors on both sides of the House, I believe, have sought to achieve over the years. That decision has been to refer to the ICJ the contention by Venezuela that the 1899 arbitral award is invalid. On January the 30th of this year, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres informed the presidents of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana and the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela that he had, and I quote, chosen the International Court of Justice as the means that is now to be used for its solution. This position was arrived at after exhausting all of the options under the 1966 Geneva Agreement for a peaceful resolution of the controversy. And in accordance with this decision, Guyana filed its application with the ICJ on March 29th, requesting the court to adjudge and declare on several issues, including the fact that the 1899 arbitral award is valid and binding on both Guyana and Venezuela. On November 19th, in accordance with an order of the court submitted in its memorial on the Guyana submitted its memorial on the jurisdiction of the court. And the court has established April 18th, 2019 for the submission of the counter memorial by Venezuela. And we have no doubt that the court has jurisdiction to resolve the controversy that has plagued our relations with Venezuela and undermined our ability to develop our sovereign territory and the natural resources within our frontiers. We are confident that the rule of law will prevail in this arena. And now that the ICJ is now the matter is before the ICJ, observers may be tempted to ask what, if anything, is left for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to do. In relation to Venezuela, of course, Venezuela remains our neighbor, and so we still have to work closely with them on matters of mutual interest where possible within the framework of several regional and international arrangements and institutions in which we share common membership. So notwithstanding the ICJ process, Guyana remains open to pursuing meaningful functional cooperation whenever the opportunity arises. And we have sought to do just this in relation to challenges we face in relation to health, for example, as you know, the problems of measles, malaria, and other infectious diseases and threatened pandemics. Mr. Speaker, this Honorable House would also be aware that Venezuela, at the highest political level, meaning in its own National Assembly, has not accepted the direction of the SG of this matter to the court. So I leave that there. Venezuela in the meantime, continues to experience a quite significant outflow of Venezuelans to its immediate as well as its distant neighbors. And in recent years, Guyana has, or in recent months even, Guyana has itself been the source, being the destination of many thousands of migrants. Of course, I think we ought to acknowledge and not forget that Guyana itself, over the last 3 or 4 decades, has been the origin of many migrants to distant and near shores. And in fashioning our own policies and reactions to the movements of persons, we have to bear that in mind. The people crossing our borders will not only be, and have not only been, Venezuelans, but also Cubans, for example, Haitians, and of course in the distant past we have had significant movements of migrants from Suriname, which I think most people forget, and which is something that we shouldn't. So we've sought to address these regular as well as irregular flows across our territories by putting in place mechanisms that avoid the undesirable feature of criminalizing ordinary persons or those migrants forced to move simply for infringements of relatively routine immigration laws. I don't want to take that too far, but I'm saying part of our goal here is to try and ensure that we use means that, whilst they protect our security and national interest and our citizens, do not perhaps go overboard in terms of criminalizing those that move for reasons that we can understand politically. On the other hand, our relations with our CARICOM sister state, Suriname, is a warm relationship, but not without its challenges. And those challenges, I might add, are not without solutions. But the challenges do require political will and good faith, and most importantly, the full implementation of agreements that we have signed with the government of Suriname. I'd like to emphasize that the border commissions of both states, we have a joint border commission, meet and work towards developing recommendations for a solution to the outstanding border issues between Guyana and Suriname. A resolution based on the diplomatic history of boundary creation from the 1930s in particular. And we have to be mindful of the fact that the agreements reached between ourselves and Suriname are on occasions made inoperable, or perhaps I should say barely operable, because some agencies in the Republic of Suriname mistakenly view their own laws as being superior to or not consistent with the agreements that they've signed with us. And so this is an area that we have to work on. It is an area in which the border commissions need to attend to. As I say, they're not insoluble. If the political will is there, they can be resolved. Both Guyana and Suriname have much to gain from cooperation. And we are the only 2 geographically contiguous CARICOM member states. And obviously there's a great deal of scope for cooperation in agriculture, health, mining, combating illegal activities, transboundary crime, and so forth. These remain top priorities. But I would say so are matters related to the Kananwaima ferry service and the good faith implementation of the cross-border protocol. These are very important to the services that we jointly commit to provide. What has been agreed to, including the operations of Guyanese minibus operators, for example, should be honored if Guyana and Suriname are to make progress towards greater cooperation for our mutual benefit. In recognition of these challenges, the 2 presidents did agree late last year to put in place a specific mechanism which will allow for consultations at the highest level through envoys that have been appointed on both sides. The arrangements or mechanics for giving effect to those appointments are still being developed. Colleagues and Mr. Speaker, as regards the maritime space, Guyana will be receiving technical assistance from the Commonwealth Secretariat to draft the necessary regulations and orders to provide the legal framework to support the Maritime Zone Act of 2010. Many of my colleague ministers have a role to play in this exercise, and when we have put our heads together, we will be able to ensure that there's a framework as regards the infrastructure for the development and expansion of the emerging sectors offshore of Guyana can be in place. Issues related to navigational rights in Guyana's EEZ, the limits of our maritime zones, economic jurisdiction, the management of living marine resources in our EEZ, and the protection of the marine environment and the marine scientific research program. So you can see from that list, Mr. Chairman, that we are speaking of the work of many of the agencies in Guyana, and many of the ministries will be required to contribute to that. In this, the 50th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic relations, Mr. Chairman, we have a year of extraordinary significance in the history of our relations with Brazil. There were several high-level exchange visits and the convening of meetings of the various mechanisms for bilateral cooperation, and these covered a wide range of areas, success in which could only redound to the benefit of our peoples. Worthy of mention in this regard is the completion of the drilling, which has been mentioned by my colleagues, the drilling of potable water by way of 8 artisanal wells in the South Rupununi by the Brazilian military, a process initiated by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and in collaboration with the Itamaraty on the other side. And we will continue to build our long-standing good neighborly relations with Brazil. It is, of course, both a destination and a consumer market, so it has the potential for economic cooperation, which is pretty extensive. Within the next 5 years, for example, Brazil, which is already the world's leading exporter of soya, is scheduled to displace the USA as the main global exporter of corn. So the point I'm making is that we will be working, and we are seeking to collaborate with our neighbor, not only in providing transport access to the Atlantic, but also acquiring some of the management and technology skills that they have exhibited and exploited in order to achieve these feats in the agricultural arena. As regards CARICOM, Mr. Speaker, I wish to refer to the fact that the maintenance of our territorial integrity is largely a function of the collaboration between ourselves, is largely a function of the management of our foreign relations, and in the management of our foreign relations, CARICOM looms very large. It is the center of what we might call a concentric circle of international relations. And we continue to appreciate the value of that relationship, even as we participate actively to try to strengthen CARICOM itself, especially by way of the CSMA, the Single Market and Economy, which we believe is important to CARICOM's future, is critical to its economic well-being and social welfare in the future. And the decisions taken at the recently concluded meeting of this Prime Ministerial Subcommittee in Trinidad and Tobago are very valuable in this regard. For a long time, the discussions at the level of CARICOM heads has tended to suggest that there's been a stalemate. We've come to a cul-de-sac. I think what you will see in the declaration issued by the heads 2 days ago, and in the conclusions of CARICOM heads, is a commitment to moving forward on many of the areas that we appear to have been stalled in recent times. And so, for example, there's been a decision to expand the category of skilled nationals to include agricultural workers, beauticians, security guards, and some other areas. So this is in relation to the movement of people, as well, thank you, as well as other areas. And we are amongst the states that signed the protocol on contingent rights and the declaration to provisionally apply that protocol. Contingent rights, I might add, are rights granted to CARICOM nationals and to the spouse and dependents of such nationals if the principal CARICOM person has exercised the right of establishment, provision of services, movement of capital, or free movement of skills. And at the CARICOM level, I would also say that we have worked assiduously with a number of the member territories of CARICOM, Trinidad and Tobago, Barbados, and Cuba, in a bid to pursue the very goals that I set out at the very beginning in order was to collaborate in a manner that would ensure that we can take advantage of the skills within the CARICOM region, of the markets in CARICOM, and of the opportunities now being opened up in Guyana. And some of those are specific to the oil and gas sector. For the wider CARICOM region, in relation to Cuba, for example, as you know, we've had long and deep and quite fruitful political and cultural relations with Cuba. We are moving to a stage where we are working on the economic relations with this very important political partner. And at the level of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the embassy in Havana, for example, you will have seen that considerable success has been achieved in opening the Cuban market, again, to paddy and rice, as well as in the area of pharmaceuticals. So those efforts have borne fruit, and I think, Mr. Speaker, as a nation, we have to ready ourselves to be enterprising and innovative in trying to deepen collaboration with our partners within the traditional and the widening CARICOM fora. In the Americas...
I'll remember you have 5 minutes remaining.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. In the Americas, we have also sought to deepen our relations, and you see in recent times a lot more effort being made, especially in relation to Chile, for example, in the area of mining and governance, Argentina on the cultural side, Colombia in technical cooperation, cooperation possibly in agro-industry, Mexico and elsewhere. But I want to say that that doesn't mean that we have forgotten the long-standing ties with traditional partners such as Canada and the USA, with which we enjoy close and good relationships. The work in relation to Europe is well known, context of Brexit, Cotonou, and in the Middle East and the Pacific, a considerable amount of effort is being made, especially to take advantage of offers that they have made to collaborate with us in the new areas that we're developing together with other areas of common interest, climate change, in small and vulnerable economies, and so forth. In relation to Africa and the collaboration with Africa, diplomatic relations and work on the political side can be expected to be deepened, and we'll see some effort, as with the Middle East, to open either additional embassies or honorary consulates, as well as other dimensions of cooperation. Mr. Speaker, I close with a comment on the question of working to enhance our cooperation with the diaspora, and then also, and finally, on the question of capacity building of the ministry. The government of Guyana firmly believes that our country's foreign policy will be best served by a core of professionals who collectively comprise a diverse but relevant pool of skills. As such, throughout the year, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs has ensured that Guyana benefited from our participation in numerous regional and international fora, dealing with issues which are relevant to our own foreign policy focus. The Ministry has conducted several in-house training programs at the Foreign Service Institute and has been able to organize, with the assistance of bilaterals, training for our staff abroad. So in conclusion, Mr. Speaker, I would like to say that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs remains committed to working towards securing a better life for all Guyanese by safeguarding our sovereign rights and interests and working with like-minded states in the international community. We aim to build alliances in pursuit of our national development objectives. To this end, I wish to commend to the House the Budget 2019 before us, which helps to fund and facilitate the work of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in pursuing these goals.